I think we should be concerned. I think there's a big gap in knowledge about the impacts of fracking on groundwater. There's been some incidents in Queensland that have led to a lot of people thinking that those concerns about the knowledge gaps should be taken really seriously and that there might be serious risks. For those of you who don't know, fracking is the process where they drill for coal seam gas, and it involves basically drilling down to a gas well and then fracturing rock in order to get the gas out from under the ground. And then it has quite a big impact, particularly the main environmental impact that we're concerned about are the impacts on groundwater, because potentially by fracturing the rock you're allowing groundwater isn't always clean. There's dirty groundwater, there's saline groundwater and there's fresh water. By fracturing the rock you may allow for cross-contamination. You may also release minerals in the rocks into the water so that the water becomes contaminated with heavy metals like arsenic. And there's also, so they're the kind of risks that we're looking at. And Australia is obviously very water dependent for our food production, and even for drinking water, I think in some instances groundwater is used. So I think certainly in the short term, in terms of Victoria's regulation, I think there's a moratorium on fracking at the moment, but that is only temporary. And my personal view is that the regulation in Victoria, once that moratorium is lifted, is not adequate to manage those risks to water and to agriculture. So I think it is something that we should be concerned about in terms of food production.
There's a lot of nodding going on in the panel there. Did anybody else want to add anything? I know, Ron, you're from the department, but you're also a scientist, a trained agricultural scientist.
Yeah, look, I think a cautious approach is very sensible. We don't know enough about it. Certainly it's a huge industry in the US, coal seam fracking. The US has reinvented itself essentially as an exporter of energy now rather than an importer of energy. But I agree, we do need to walk very cautiously on this one, and I think government is doing that with the moratorium in place, and certainly my division is doing some of the modelling associated with where the groundwater is at the moment, where the aquifers are, and what are some of the implications if this does happen.
Thank you. Oh, did you want to add? Yeah.
I was just going to add quickly another risk in relation to fracking that we've seen in other states. It's also the impact that it has on communities. When the fracking goes, mining laws in Australia allow, they basically mean that the government owns the resources under the ground, and while the farmer may own the surface of the land, they can effectively be required by law, whether they agree or not, to provide access to miners to allow people to extract that resource. And that whole process has created an awful lot of conflict in some communities in Queensland and New South Wales. And I think that's another risk to, the health, the social health of rural communities in Australia.
Yes, there's a big program across our department on soil health and how we define it, monitoring it, how we can improve it. That involves both very wide education, practice change type activities, but also a lot of research and development in that space. The big opportunity, we believe, is we understand a fair amount of the chemistry and the physics that goes on in soils. The big opportunities in the biological parts of the soil, and we have there is a large national program now which we are connected into about trying to not just identify the biota and fauna and flora that exist in the soils, but trying to understand what they do and how they function and how they interact with plants and releasing nutrients and things like that. So look, there is a major program of works underway, both nationally. All states are involved. There's a lot of research underway at the universities as well. Part of our interest is in carbon sequestration potential of our soils, and nationally we're hooked into programs around what's the potential of our soils to sequester carbon to help the greenhouse climate change issue, but also what practices can our farmers do to also lock up some of the carbon that's or carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere and lock it into the soils to give us benefits in that space.
Thanks, Ron.
Just add something?
Yes, Grant.
So I'm sure this is no news to anyone in Horsham, but I think just an example of how far we've come on this. The VFF back in the 80s had sand drift committees, and they were based on the Mallee Wimmera production systems, which were basically fell over, the soil was tilled and tilled and tilled to kill weeds before a crop was sown. We no longer have those committees. There's a photograph in the VFF in 1983 of a very large dust cloud that roared across Melbourne. Those who are old enough will remember that. We no longer had that, even though we had effectively a 10-year drought, including a couple of years of very severe droughts. We no longer see that loss of soil because of farm production systems, because we've learned. And we're learning all the time, and with the help of scientists, we're getting better and better and better.
Certainly it's government's target is to double food production by 2030, and we're working hard in that space, and that's why they're investing so much money in research and development and trade missions and other activities like that. Energy is going to be a problem for most of the farming community. It's a problem now. The cost of energy is rising, as we know. Getting energy to certain parts of Victoria in three-phase power is an issue in some parts of Victoria and many parts of Australia. So there's a whole bunch of issues tied up in that. Alex, I don't have an answer around how we get the energy and the agriculture industries to work together on this. My personal view is we need to be cautious, and that's probably just my scientific background in this space. But I think I think that's the way to go, and we may not be moving as fast as likes of yourself want to move, but at the moment I think we need to have a cautious approach.
Grant? Yep.
I don't think there is any reason why the exploration and coal seam gas industry or mining can't work with agriculture. It's done in the past. Even in Queensland, it's not necessarily all bad news. There is certainly parts of where those developments have gone ahead that farmers are quite comfortable with what's happened. The precautionary approach, I agree with Ron. We need to make sure, in fact that's where the VFF policy sits, we need to be quite sure that the risks, and nothing is without risk, that the risks are carefully managed, and we believe that the best science shows that whatever the production type of system is used actually has a minimal risk, and we're confident it's not going to cause long-lasting damage either to the water resource or to the land resource sitting above it. Victoria has a much more rigid, particularly around access to water, that the miners have to comply with than do our states to the north. So there is more rigour around the approval process in Victoria, which is, I think, quite a good thing rather than a bad thing. Where we are in Victoria is probably where Queensland was 15 years ago, and so I think that a sudden burst of coal seam gas exploration or production in Victoria is still a little way off. I think there's still a lot of testing going on and working out, and as we know, we learn more every time we do something. So it can live together. There is a wider community problem, and it's a bit like the wind farms, that it tends to be the people who are actually getting the economic benefit from where a wind farm or where the coal seam gas well sits are happy, but the neighbour who's perhaps bearing some of the amenity, some of the risk impacts and receiving nothing, does seem to cause some conflicts in those communities. So I think we've got to get better at actually managing the community impacts as well as actually the environmental and production impacts.
I think that potentially there might be, but I don't think the current regulatory framework provides that opportunity. As I said, a lot of people don't have a choice about whether coal seam gas comes onto their property, so they're unhappy about it. A lot of people feel pressured about it because they've got neighbours all around them that have coal seam gas, so they feel like, in effect, it's come into their community, it's affecting their land and their way of life, and they didn't have a say in it. So, and I think not just coal seam gas, but mining generally, as part of the mining boom, mining has come in from some more marginal areas to areas that are closer to residential areas and also to very productive agricultural areas, and I think that's creating a land use conflict that needs to be managed. And I don't think our current system that gives miners more rights to land than other land uses is a good framework for managing that conflict.